Hey everyone, and welcome back to Digital Games, the channel for everything games and health. If that sounds interesting to you, make sure you like this video, share, and hit that follow or subscribe button so you can best support the channel and never miss new content. Every single new subscriber or comment on the channel really makes me so happy to see, so thank you for being here and helping to grow the channel. Today's guest is Andy Robertson, video game and technology expert who specializes in family gaming. Andy is the author of the Taming gaming book and creator of TamingGaming.com, the family video game database. Andy is also the owner of FamilyGamerTV. He is a freelance games and technology journalist for the likes of Forbes, BBC, and The Guardian, and an expert on all things video games and family. Andy, thanks so much for being here today. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm excited. We've got a lot to talk about, haven't we, I think?
We do. This has been one that's been too long in the making. I think we first connected several months ago at this point about doing this and just schedules being schedules. But I'm glad that we were finally able to get
Yeah.
together and talk about family and games and that connection. So, Andy, to kick things off, tell me a little bit about yourself and your background and how you came to carve out really this niche for yourself in video games.
Yeah, so I was working as a technical author. I was writing sort of online help for tax software, which, as you can imagine, wasn't that exciting. Although it was still writing, I quite liked it. I was getting paid to write, and that was kind of what that felt like a privilege in itself. And then I kind of realized I think I had a friend who was setting up Nintendo Live. It was the early days of that site, so a
Hmm.
long time ago. And he was saying, "Oh, I can't get anyone to review Madden on the Wii.
Right.
I don't, no one wants to do it, or maybe he hasn't got the people." And I was like, "Oh, I'll do it." And
Yeah.
so he sent me the game, and me and my friends got together, and we took some photos, and we had a good time, and I wrote it up. And I was like, "Oh, where do I send the game back?" And he said, "Oh no, you can keep it." I was like, "Oh,
Amazing.
okay, that's nice." And so then I was like, "Oh, this is a nice little hobby, getting games, reviewing them." And so I did that for a while. And that kind of just built up. And I realized that there wasn't loads of people writing about this from a family perspective, certainly not with hands-on. And so I would kind of review games and actually test them out with kids, either my kids if they were the right age, or friends and family, and sort of give a real hands-on perspective of whether these games work, what the reality of these games were in the home. It was kind of the era of the Wii. And as that sort of increased, and I know there's more and more work to do, I kind of realized, oh, perhaps there's a full-time job here.
Right.
But I couldn't really tell without kind of quitting the day job. So I took the plunge, and it worked out really well. So I mean,
Right.
and it was an unknown, So I had a mortgage and 3 kids, and that wasn't the kind of pattern of someone who was getting into game journalism. It was usually single, younger people who could do a house share and that
Right.
kind of thing. And I soon realized that I thought I wanted to be the editor of a magazine because that was still the era. That was the kind of pinnacle of journalism, was like these video game magazines. But then I soon realized that those jobs were paying mid 20s sort of £1,000, which really wasn't enough to support a family and pay a mortgage. And so I had to kind of find fingers in different pies,
Right.
find different
Right.
things to do, which I managed to do. And I think that was probably pretty good because I then had a variety of different sort of things that I was working on and kind of set me up for a pattern that I kind of continue today. But I just kept working that kind of furrow of families of video games that the Wii sort of started, and a lot of people wrote about it, but then kind of moved on and went back to kind of the more core sort of gaming writing, where I
Yeah.
just sort of stayed there and was ready for when Connect came and looked deeply at that. Was quite a supporter of Connect, really, although kind of most of the kind of more core game press or players didn't weren't that positive about it.
Yeah.
But from a family perspective, it was difficult. It wasn't perfect, but the payoff was so good when it worked that I was pretty positive, and so it just carried on with that kind of line of work, really. And there's more and more people who write about it from this perspective now, but because I guess I started pretty early, I've got a good view of how it's developed and kind of maybe an unusual perspective of where it's going, and kind of what families actually need. My kids have grown up; they're now 18,
Sure.
16, 15. So I've kind of gone through quite a few stages. Obviously, not finished yet, and didn't always get it right, but I've kind of learnt a lot along the way. And so that's kind of what's got me here, really.
Yeah. So let's start a little bit high level, and then I want to dive in and get a little bit of a deeper understanding of what you do. But starting high level, tell me what does it mean? What does it mean when you say you're writing about this this gaming through the lens of family, this connection between gaming and family. What does that look like? Who are you writing to? What is the need that you're filling there?
So really, it's looking at what are games in the life of a child. And even for people who grew up with games, it's easy to think, our games are entertainment. They're something that children will grow out of. They're for a young audience, and they're fine and fun, but they're not for adults. And if that's true, then the way we parent them will be about making sure kids stay safe while they're playing, like a playground or something, keep them out of danger, but really wait for them to grow out of it and to get on with the rest of their life. But my kind of hunch, I think, was that actually games are more than that. Both, for kids, actually they represent more than that. They're these spaces that they can go and do lots of really interesting work on their identity, socializing, who they are, aspirations in terms of who they want to be, but also that us as grown-ups playing games, we can enjoy that just as much. And obviously, the breadth of games on offer means that you can play at any age. And as soon as you move into that territory of, oh, actually, yeah, games are media. So games are more like books,
Mm-hmm.
films, music, theatre, maybe. That really changes, what you need to do as a parent. And so rather than just kind of policing your kids to keep them safe until they grow out of it, it's much more, oh, how do I guide my child into a really healthy, lifelong relationship with video games so that they're getting a lot out of them? And so that I'm ambitious for what they're doing in these games. So looking at them almost like as if they were learning an instrument or learning a foreign language, that this is something really valuable that they're doing. So so to do that, parents need different resources, and that was kind of the gap. Like we need a bit of literacy, and we kind of need to get ahead of our kids to understand, where they're going. And many parents will say, well, that's impossible. My kids are just so into this that they're always ahead of me. And it seems like that's true until you just bring a bit of the appropriate information in, and actually just a regular, maybe 10 or 20 minutes looking at this a week as a parent, and you will soon catch up and then be ahead of what your child might like to do. And then you get into this, oh, now I can be a guide. I can sort of help them move forward. And you start to earn kind of, if you do that in a good way that the kids like, and you guide them into great experiences, you build equity in this space. So then whatever happens in sort of later teenage years, you've then got a tangible voice to actually sort of say with some authority, what you think would be good, or maybe what they should do less of. And it's much less of you versus a child and their games, and it's more like you and your child discovering games together.
Right.
And that's kind of what drives most of the sort of the content I create for parents.
Yeah, yeah. So let's move into that content. You have a couple of different things that you've created, platforms. You have a channel on YouTube, FamilyGamerTV, and you have your database, family database gaming website, taminggaming.com. So can you talk about sort of the differences between these two platforms, and at the heart of it, what they are and what you're trying to solve there?
Yeah, so just touching on YouTube to begin with, that sort of 2012, I kind of stumbled into, creating video content. That's kind of what people want on the internet.
Yeah.
And just from a commercial perspective, just suddenly realized if I was at an event and I did a video, I could get many more engagements and viewership than I would even in a national newspaper. And so once I realized that, I was kind of in a position, having sort of been, being freelance, that I could sort of double down on that. And so for a couple of years, really did almost a video a week, just trying to figure out, is it sort of 2012, 2013, so pretty early days in YouTube, before the sort of phrase influencer had really established itself.
Mm-hmm.
And just figuring out, well, what do parents want? Oh, and also what do young kids want? Is there content they can watch together? And so that's been a really lovely journey over those sort of 6 or 7 years since 2012. And during that time, I figured out how to get a pretty good audience and got to like 500,000 subscribers. And that to be frank, that it paid the mortgage for a few years. So I
Yeah,
feel
that's
really
amazing.
privileged
Amazing.
to have done that. And a lot of that is hard work, maybe a bit of talent, I don't know, but
Yeah.
a lot of it is timing, and being in the right place at the right time, and being able to double down on it and really, um, go, go for broke really, and think, okay, I want to see if I can replicate some early success, and that's the challenge.
Right.
That gave me a lovely kind of window on kind of kids of the world. You do a video and you instantly hear what they're thinking of or what they're responding to in your content. And they'll tell you if they like it or if they don't like it, or they'll
Yeah.
they'll
Kids
offer
aren't
up
shy.
ideas. Yeah, and a lot of people say don't read the comments, and I always read the comments. And that I was happy to do that, and I knew I'd get a mix of compliments and insults. So But a lot of those comments led to me thinking, oh yeah, actually this is a good idea. Some child somewhere has saying, oh, what I'd really like to see is what would happen if this toy did this, and there
Right.
was this game, and I'm like, oh, I could do a little video about that, couldn't I? And often those videos are the ones that then really took off, and the numbers are crazy on YouTube. Like some of those bigger videos, like 20, 30 million views. And so when that's happening, you feel like in the whirlwind of the kind of the younger audience around the world, which is again kind of lovely.
Mm.
It kind of there's only so long you can keep doing that. So with YouTube's sort of change in terms of advertising policy, and as a parent, I really like that you have to flag the videos that are designed for children, so children don't get targeted by adverts. Um, so that just meant that there was less revenue for someone who was creating videos that had a large children audience.
Sure.
And so it's kind of like, okay, it's time to kind of move on. And that's when I was invited to write a book for parents, this Taming gaming book. And so that was, the timing was quite nice. Um, should I just, do you want to hear about the book? Should I just dive straight into that?
I think that'd be great. Yeah, tell us
Yeah,
about it's a
cool.
perfect
I'll give you
transition.
a
Tell
little,
us about the book.
yeah, so I'll give you a little sort of potted. So this is the book. And kind of, it's quite a nice, big, colourful book. What's interesting about it, I think, is that it's in two halves. You can hold it up. I can hold it up there. You can
Yeah,
see
yeah.
the first half is kind of the general, relatively straightforward advice. It took me kind of a year to kind of research it and go back to kind of the science in lots of areas, but really wanting to address, the things that parents worry about. And that was really violence in games and the effect on children, video game addiction, particularly the WHO criteria, adding video game disorder to their disease classification. That was on people's lists.
Sure.
Gambling was one I deal with, although I don't have many parents come to me about loot boxes and gambling, but it's a hot topic and something that's important to talk about. And then online dangers in terms of children playing with people they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of covered those bases, but kind of the through line was, well, if you've got a child, really the most powerful thing you can do before you get to the online settings and things is to play games yourself. And many people have said that phrase, but then said play games with your child.
Uh-huh.
And so there's kind of twist on this and saying, actually, if you play them yourself, you're challenged to think, okay, are there games that are valuable enough for me to take time away from as a busy parent watching Netflix or, doing something else? Like, could I really choose to play a video game rather than watching Netflix? And for a mum or dad who've never played a game before, that seems kind of preposterous.
Yeah.
And actually, when I was I'd be in the school talking about this, and I'd be stopped in the middle of what I was saying by a mum or a dad saying, can I just stop you? I love what you're saying. I'm a really good mum to my kids, my boys in particular. But can I just say, I'm never going to play a game
Right.
because I don't like shooting, and they're for kids, aren't they? And all the other parents would nod, and it's not surprising because that is kind of indicative of the position that games are in our society. But then after those sessions, the mum or dad would come and talk to me, and I'd say, well, let's go on a journey. And I had some unusual games that would take them into experiences they wouldn't expect, like games about refugees, games about kind of working in an Amazon warehouse. So not the kind of Candy Crush kind of stuff, but things which were enjoyable, but also were kind of about something. And that was quite successful. They would then come back and say, "Oh, that game you suggested, it wasn't what I expected. Actually, I really enjoyed it." But the key thing was that they would then say, and actually, my kids realized I was playing this game, and we had this great conversation, not just about my game, but I had these different questions to ask about their game, rather than just, why can't you stop? It's tea time.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, oh, what are you doing? What are you trying to achieve? Are you getting better at that? Like, how do you think? What's your next mission in the game? What's the character you're playing? What's happening in the world? And so those kind of conversations changed, and then they would have this phrase that I heard over and over, which would say something like, "And you know what? I feel like I've got my boys back." You'd have these mums saying that, and that could be quite an
That's
emotional
awesome.
moment when they're
Yeah.
going to hear themselves say it, and then it catches up with them. And all I had done really was just to give them a bit of information about some games that they could try to just start them on this journey to sort of start to get towards into this thing their kids were doing, maybe then in the future to get ahead of it. And then that's what the second part of the book is trying to replicate, is that journey by presenting unusual games or games that like parents have never played, games wouldn't have heard of, in a recipe format. So kind of what the game is, the ingredients you need, the method for how to get it set up if you need any accounts and stuff, some serving suggestions, how families have enjoyed it, and then down here sort of something to follow, other games that you might like to play. And so the beginning of this sort of second half of the book is a section specifically designed for people who've never played games. And you'll probably recognize some of these, but most parents will never have heard of a game like Reigns or a game like Bury Me My Love, and they can be really powerful in them engaging and sort of discovering that games aren't just about entertainment,
Right.
and set them on that journey. So
That's awesome.
in terms of the book, that was kind of the main the main sort of thrust of it.
Yeah.
Um, which then does lead into the database. But maybe I don't know if you want to talk a bit more
Yeah,
about the book.
so before we get into the
Bury you in
database, just
introduction.
no, I mean it's fantastic and it's so exciting. It makes me want to have that right on my coffee table.
It's quite pretty
Oh,
too.
it's beautiful and it's nice, kind of like a work of art in a way to flip through and see all these games and organize in the way you've done it. But it certainly strikes a chord with me in multiple ways. First of all, I take it very seriously. I have three nephews and three nieces as well, and it's very as well as my own two kids, and it's very like as the uncle. I am the gaming uncle. I take it upon my responsibility to educate them about video games and to play with them, and I see it. When I play with, let's say, my 5-year-old nephew, what he is able to grasp in terms of game mechanics, in terms of using the controller, what is maybe too difficult for him. And then every time that we play together, I mean, I think of it almost, he doesn't know this, but in terms of a curriculum. And, what game can we pick out that is going to help him grow and learn and work on his problem solving and his critical thinking, and you really can do that. And it's so interesting when I get all my kids and my nieces and nephews all together and they're all playing like something a little bit easier like Mario Kart. It's so amazing to see the differences between the different ages and how they interact with the game. The young ones maybe are just holding the controllers, not really knowing what they're doing. The other ones, a little bit more agency there. But so that's really interesting. I also the other thing, Andy, that you made me think of is using games to connect with kids to really break down barriers. And you mentioned that in terms of parents and parenting, which I think is very insightful. My experience with that, other than parenting, has been in the hospital setting, actually, with pediatric patients. And I'll always remember, when these kids are playing Fortnite on their phone, or talking about Fortnite or playing whatever it is, and then I would come in the room, and there's always a distance between the doctor or medical student and the patient, certainly at first. But the second I could relate to them and get down on their level and talk to them in Fortnite, and not just high level stuff, but get into the details, you could do this when you build and all, the barrier just completely broke, and I was able to connect with them in a much more meaningful way. So I completely agree with you, and think it's fantastic, the message that you're sending out for parents.
Yeah, and you start very quickly gain equity in that space, if it's genuine. And that's the challenge, actually, that for parents, kids will soon know if you're just like, oh yeah, Fortnite, that's that game, who are you shooting? If the questions aren't genuine. But I think that genuineness doesn't have to come from the parent playing Fortnite, because many parents never want to play Fortnite.
Sure.
That's fine. But if they've played a different game,
Right.
it's like if you're trying to talk about books, you've never read any other books on Harry Potter or something, then it's never gonna work. But if you've read other books, then suddenly you're in this world, and you're treating it like something that's valuable. And that's I think that's the biggest thing, because kids don't expect adults to do that. They
Right.
expect them to be, oh, the message is minimize the games, maximize the schoolwork, or whatever it is, the chores or
Right.
meal times.
Right.
And we set up these competing elements in life, rather than anchoring games as part of family life, so that you've got this pattern that's just very healthy going forward.
Yeah, and I love that the first chapters in the book are geared towards those people who have never played a game before or have very little experience. I have an aunt, my aunt Julie, who is fantastic and kind enough to watch every single interview that I put out on the channel. And she's always asking me to recommend a game for her as someone who hasn't played before. And so now, Julie, you're listening, which I'm sure you are, head over to taminggaming.com and you can, or the Taming Gaming book, and we can figure that out together. So Andy, so transitioning to the website a little bit. So taminggaming.com, it's sort of this companion piece to the Taming Gaming book. a database where you break down different games into a variety of categories, from games that only require short sessions of play, to games about mental health, to games that are user-friendly for autistic individuals, to games appropriate for various age groups like we've talked about. Almost, if you could think of a category, you have it on Taming Gaming. Tell me a little bit about the site and that process of categorizing these games into different lists and even choosing what list to include on the website.
Yeah. So that because people often say, "Oh, okay, suggest a game for me," and really, what that's to prescribe a game, to use kind of medical language. That is what you need a proper exam
Yeah.
first. You need to talk to them. Okay, who are you? Who are you? What's going on in your life? What's your history? What you're excited about, and then you can start to get into, okay, there's maybe games in this corner and this corner, and really that's what the database does. It's kind of that online sort of analysis in a very simple way, so you can come in and find games that will be a good match for you. So I think we've got the screen shared, haven't we? So I
Yeah.
can kind of
You ready to
browse
roll?
around. So the backstory is that the database was never meant to be a big database.
Right.
It was supposed to be a small, like, promotional thing for the book, because the book was delayed because of COVID. Printing was delayed, and so I had this time. I was like, okay, well, I'll create a small little database. There's 60 or so games in the book. There's no index, which is something we didn't manage to get in there. So if we had it online, people could then search and sort of filter. And so we did that, and because the book is laid out into these lists, as I mentioned, one of the first things we did was to create um, these curated lists, a little bit like Netflix, so around different themes. And so this would start relatively predictably, like games around a particular age, games that are good for 3 to 6 year olds, 12-year-olds, but then soon goes into kind of unusual territory, games about aging, or games where the grandparents are heroes, or down here we've got games about being a good neighbor. And because in the UK this was kind of early COVID time, there was a lot of kind of children playing a lot of games and a lot of parents worrying about that. And so these games around mental health issues became, these lists of games became very popular, and particularly this Finding Calm from the Storm, which is a very simple little list. Each of the lists has a little preamble. If I was creating this now, it's usually a little bit more content, but we just got one paragraph just essentially saying, oh, games can be calming. But then going beyond just that statement, which is something we often say, games are educational, games are calming, or whatever, but getting into the nuts and bolts of, okay, which games are, and how does that actually work, and can I play that on my system, and how do I find these games, and then just essentially having a list of games that children have found, or anyone really have found, to have a sort of a calming experience. And that idea, I think, that, well, the realization that children weren't necessarily like misbehaving or trying to avoid schoolwork when they were playing video games, particularly that sort of chaotic COVID moment, but maybe this was a coping mechanism for this, very chaotic and potentially quite scary world. And so parents then, I think, through that had this kind of window on a part of their children's gaming that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And that, so I did this to what I thought was a tiny little interview about this for BBC Click, which is like a tech show online in the UK. And then it ended up on BBC Breakfast, which is kind of essentially the headline breakfast show. And so both on Saturday and Sunday they used this segment, and so it
Yeah.
had this influx of people using it and asking lots of questions about it, and it had its kind of day in the sun. And so now, to sort of cut to today, it's grown with bits of funding from different places, and that's something I'm still working at in terms of the finances of it. But it's basically this big, in terms of this passion project, with over 1,000 games, and a really quite unique way to search for games. And we get about 8,000 or so parents coming a day to look at it, and they'll be doing things like, we see them googling, is Call of Duty okay for my 12-year-old, maybe? And they'll come to the page either direct from Google, or they'll search on the site, and then they'll land on one of the game pages. And each of these pages, we've made careful decisions about, keeping that parent guardian perspective first. And so, unlike other sites, we don't have lots and lots of images. We just have one image. So we have to commit. And so maybe I'll often spend 15 minutes looking for the right press image to use for a game that really is indicative of the sort of experience you'll get. And in the same way, we have one video for each game. I'll just mute this. But it's been pre-watched. So it starts in the game when you're going to get meaningful content. I won't play that much more than that,
Right.
in case there's younger people watching.
That's right. I know that scene.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, as a parent, within seconds now, you've seen an image, you can see it's an 18. If you're in the US, this would be the ESRB rating, and you've seen that footage, and so you know, okay, that's what the shooting looks like. Okay, that's how realistic. Okay, I've seen a bit of blood, and you're starting to make a very, you're getting quite a lot of information in quite a short space of time because it's tailored for parents rather than for kind of avid gamers. And then we have an overview that's written by a parent and is checked by me. And we wouldn't even use words like platformer or shooter. We'd say running and jumping game. We'd say shooting game. And so some people who are, gamers will come and be like, "What do you mean running and jumping? It's like platformer." Like you're using the wrong language. But for parents who've never played, that's really important that they're not confused unnecessarily. And then because it's a database, we have lots of data points behind this. So like, how long is the game? Who do you play with online?
And I'll
How
say
many
that
players?
actually is how I use Taming Gaming all the time,
Yeah,
is to figure out, I'll be in the middle of a game and I'll be like, am I almost done with this game? And then I'll go to Taming Gaming and
yeah,
see how long it is. It's the best thing for me.
yeah, good. And then we'll get to it in a minute. Then you can also search for other games which are similar, and if you wanted a longer game, you could do that. Costs we've added probably since last time we spoke, so there's lots of details about where you can find games and if they're on sale to obviously help parents save money. But also, if we're suggesting games, we want them to be able to filter by price, so that they're not finding amazing games and there's it's 60 quid. Well, that's pointless. I can't spend that much, but they can search on that. Also, hidden costs like in-game purchases or loot boxes, we have flags for all that. And then we have the age rating. So because we work closely with Peggy and ESRB, we can share some of their examiners' reports. So there's background to what the game is. And that's quite nice. It's a collation of information. But what I'm most excited about here is the bit at the bottom where every game in the database is handpicked, linked to another 20 or so games which are of similar experience. And then at the bottom here, these are essentially presented largely in age rating, so that as a parent, if the child isn't ready, so the conversation would likely go, "Oh, look, you're only 11. I know your friends are playing it, but I just think it's too violent. I just, not yet. I think." And it's complete. We don't make a value judgment about whether that's right or wrong at any particular age. But rather than just saying no, then you can go on to say, well, how about Screen Cheat? Or have you seen Plants vs Zombies? Or there's Splatoon? Or depending on the age of the child, Super Hot.
Right.
And the child will probably be a bit suspicious at first, like, oh, this is going to be rubbish. Maybe, and then if they go and play the game and have a good experience, then they're going to come back and be, oh, that was good. What else could we play? And again, you're building that kind of equity with the child in that conversation. And then the other part of the sort of the puzzle is then if you don't know what to play, there's got a really extensive search. So you'd come in and pick age rating based on your territory, system. And again, maybe you've heard of loot boxes, but you don't know what they are. So you just want to steer clear of them until you kind of have figured them out. So you can say not loot boxes. Maybe you like the idea of playing together in a family, so you pick a four-player game. And quite quickly, you get a really quite detailed list of games, that's for your tailored situation. And then the final bit of this, which is that I'm quite excited about, is we had some funding to add accessibility data to the database,
Right.
so that you could then consider, okay, if you've got a child that's visually impaired, or low vision, or even without sight, or with a hearing issue, or motor disability, motor impairment, you could then start to search for games. So I've worked very closely with some amazing people, and who, like, many of them have become really good friends, to figure out, okay, how do we encode this? And when I came to it as an outsider, really, on the accessibility community, I was thinking, okay, I need a list of here's what you need if you're a blind gamer, here's what you need if you hard of hearing or deaf, and here's if you've got a motor issue. And of
Right.
course, that's not how it works in the real world. These different criteria all overlap each other,
That's
and
right.
really, you want to just look at the function that a game offers, so that the individual can make their own choices. And that might just be as simple as a parent with a very young child, and they want them to play a game without having to keep coming and saying, what does this say, what does this say? Or a parent with an older child, and they like the idea of them doing lots of reading. To if you're have a vision issue, then maybe you need large text or high contrast text, or if you have hearing issues, maybe you need subtitles. But do those subtitles indicate who's speaking? Do they indicate tone? And so there's a lot of detail here. There's about
Yeah.
100 data points, and we've probably got about half the games covered in the database, which is like 8,000 bits of data. And the one I'll often use here is low pressure. And so if you want to find games that don't put you on the clock and let you kind of proceed at your own pace, if you don't get on well with that, or if you have a child in that situation, that then is added to the search. So now we've got a search which is four or more players on ESRB everyone 10 or younger without loot boxes on the Switch with this no pressure setting, and it's come back with 9 games. So that's
Yeah.
a really detailed search. Um,
It
but
reminds me
but
of there was like this toy I used to play with in like middle school. I would do it like during class under my desk, and it was like a
yeah,
20 questions thing, right? And you'd think of any celebrity or like food or like whatever, and you just think about it, and you'd answer 20 questions, and it would get it, and it had an incredible success rate. At least I remember that as a
yeah,
kid. So that's what you can try and maybe you could try and trick the system and see if
yeah.
it'll come up.
Yeah, eventually. I mean, if you keep putting more and more criteria, eventually you'll find something.
Right.
You'll have
You'll,
no games.
yeah.
And
Right.
like here, like you might then think, okay, well, why is Overcooked included here? For example, that's not a low pressure game. Like in fact, it's anything but low pressure. When I play it, it's absolute chaos. But then on the accessibility section on each game page, there's an account of all how for any unusual criteria that's not obvious. And then with Overcooked, you can do a practice mode in the first 2 games that removes the clock. And on the newer games, it also has various ways you can reduce pressure as well, which means that you can then use that to guide what you're playing. So yeah, so that's kind of how it works really. You could on the list. The final bit is on the lists. A lot of people use these and then filter them. So for example, the educational list, for example, we've got one which we did with the Literacy Trust about games which really get good at getting kids reading, and that is often used by teachers. And so the teacher might say, well, this is fine, but it includes older rated games, and my class is a certain age, and so they could come in and pick a rating, and then it would filter the list in the same way that we were filtering. And you could also apply any of the accessibility criteria here as well. And so we've got 47 games that meet that. And so you also might think, okay, I've got an Xbox I can plug into the whiteboard, and so you can kind
Right.
of continue to tailor
Right.
what you've got. And as you do that, obviously the number slowly goes down.
Wow.
But
I mean, really amazing. And just obviously through that demo that you walked us through, which thank you so much for doing that. That was really helpful. You see just how intricate it is and how much detail you've paid attention to in building this. So it's really great. And then again, yeah, I would recommend, I mean, I think this is a wonderful tool for maybe almost anybody. If I've used it, like I said, for timing of games, but also if I haven't known what to play, I have gone in and tried those filters because the mood I'm feeling and see what comes up. And some of the games I'll be familiar with, and some of them I won't. So I think it's really interesting, and it'll be really awesome to see how it continues to grow and who latches on to this. And I think it'll only become more and more popular and useful. So really, really great. Andy, I wanted to do something fun. And
yeah,
like you said, this is not meant to be clinical. If you really want to recommend a game for somebody, it's a lot more intricate than just quick rapid fire questions. But I didn't prepare you on this one, but I thought it'd be fun to do a little bit of a speed round. So I'm gonna set my clock here. Okay, we're gonna set it for 1 minute. Hold on a minute. I gotta pull up my clock. All right, stopwatch, reset. Okay, and I'm just gonna rapid fire, and you just as quickly as you can try to come up with an answer. Okay, so we got a couple questions here. All right, Andy, the speed round begins. Andy, what is the best game for a complete beginner?
I think it depends on the age, but the one I often use is "Bury Me, My Love" because it's about a complex topic, but you can play it on your phone and it's just a few minutes a day.
Okay, Andy, what is the best game for someone who is skeptical about video games?
I think a game you can play with someone else, and so there's a game Wilmot's Warehouse where you work to stack items in the warehouse, and you have to do a lot of communication with the other person. I think it opens up in how collaborative games are, which often is unexpected. I think.
Awesome. Best game for a 5-year-old.
Go Vacation, which is on the Wii or the Switch, and obviously on the Wii U, which is this amazing kind of open world 4-player simultaneous exploration and mission game that has kind of sewn in lots of kind of Wii Sports style mini games, but it's really the exploration. There's like public transport, and it's amazing.
Best game for a parent-child duo.
I think there's lots of games where you can collaborate together, but the game I love, and I've just been thinking about, is a game called Fru, Fru, which is played with Xbox with a Kinect camera, one of you stands in front of the camera and your silhouette's on the screen, and wherever your silhouette is, it affects the platforms. It's a platforming game. The other player holds the controller, and so you have to kind of get into the right position or maybe hold things up so that you can make jumps and so you can affect what's going on. So it's really physical, but you also again have to communicate.
I love that.
If with some detail.
I love that. Best game for a romantic partner duo.
Um, I quite like playing single player games and then doing like a hand back and forth. So I've enjoyed playing Firewatch because it's quite slow and it doesn't require lots of skill. But there's a really interesting narrative, obviously,
Yeah.
and there's a bit of intrigue, and you can kind of play it in a chapterized kind of way.
Best game to make your brain sweat.
Um, there's a platform game called Ib and Ob, which is IBB and OBB, Ib and Ob. And it's a two-player game. It's on the Switch, but it's not. It's on PlayStation now, but it's not on PlayStation 4, so it's a bit hard to
Uh-huh.
find. But you have to. It divides the game in half, and you have to work with gravity. One of you is on one side, and one of you is the other. And so you have to. It's a platform game, and you have to kind of propel each other up. And again, it's not only talking about it.
We lost Andy for a second. This is going to affect his time terribly.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, Andy. I lost the internet for a second. My wife upstairs wanted to play with your time, so she evilly unplugged the internet in the middle of our speed round. But we still love her. I think we got most of that last one. Let's go. Best game for mental health.
Again, it depends what your mental health issues are. But for
It's a
me,
very broad question.
yeah, but for me, New Super Lucky's Tale actually was a big part of my early lockdown experience, and just committing to play a few levels of that each evening. Um, Something about it is it's quite exuberant and difficult, but it's also quite calming because of the kind of cartoon nature of it. It's a very simple, well executed platform game, and I just really enjoyed setting aside some time and making it part of my routine, which could have been any game. So there was that, and also I've just reminded myself there's the game Everything, which is this very strange experience where you can inhabit any object in the universe. You start off as a horse or something, and you can go down and down and down until you're a piece of pollen, or up and up and up until you're a whole planet. But what's interesting is you can then move around with those objects, but also the time changes. So if you're very tiny, time moves very very slowly. If you're very big, time moves very quick. And there's just that kind of you can just choose a kind of size in an object and just sort of spend some time hanging out there. And again, it's quite beautiful because you'll see the sunset and
Right.
sunrise, and there'll be
I love
views.
these are games I've never heard of, and they sound incredible. So I'm so
Yeah,
excited to
yeah. So
get these. This is
that's
great.
everything. Yeah,
Andy, couple more here. Best
yeah.
game for empathy.
I quite like. There's a couple that come to mind, but there's a game called Chariot, um, where two of you have to. I think you're transporting the ashes of the king. It's not a particularly heavy game, but that's the sort of the setup where you're trying to get him somewhere to relieve his ghost, and you have him on this chariot that two of you can pull. It's a platform game, and you have to get it through all sorts of different chambers. But you have to really work together. Um, and I think the empathy here is understanding that, particularly a more novice player or different players at different time, will become quite frustrated at different stages. And so working together to not only solve problems, but also look after each other's kind of mental state as well, particularly if you're playing with young children, because
Right.
it's actually that you need a lot of empathy to play.
Okay, and we'll do two more here. Best game for music.
There's a game called Drop Mix that was really expensive. It was a harmonics game, and it launched with a big peripheral and lots of cards. And you put the cards down in a particular way. It was like a collectible deck builder game, but physical. But it connects to your iPad that controls the game. What's interesting about it is it does this amazing kind of music mixing of all these different genres. And you have keyboard and vocals, lots of kind of 80s like Salt and Pepper and
Yeah.
Run DMC, all that kind of stuff. And it's just amazing. And what's great is that at the moment, and the last kind of few months, it's about £15 on Amazon because they're basically, I guess, selling them off. Where it was about £100 when you got it originally, so it's hard to recommend because it's expensive. But it's an amazing game, and what you get in the starter pack will keep you going for 6 months. You can buy expansions,
Right.
uh, but at that price, it's amazing.
Okay, and last one. It's the big one, Andy. Best game ever.
Well, it depends. It depends who you are, isn't it? And I'd like to pick something um, really family friendly and also really unobvious. But to be honest, the game that I would choose if I could only save one game from a burning building, or actually maybe even one piece of media, would be The Last of Us Part Two.
That
It's just
works.
amazing.
That
And
works.
I played through it. I played through all the Uncharted with my daughter,
Yeah.
and then she was like 16. I think we were like, should we play Last of Us One? And then she's like, yeah, I think I'm up for this. And so we played through that, and then she was about 17, and then we moved on to Last of Us Part Two. And she loves it too. So she's played through it again, and I'm on my third playthrough. So it's such a mature
Yeah.
experience.
I
The
think
challenge is what to do next because there's nothing that quite matches it in
that's
that
right.
way.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's how we thought after Last of Us 1, and then they came out with Last of Us 2, so
Yeah,
we'll see.
I'm thinking it'll be like a far, but there'll be part three, and then
Right.
that'll be
Well,
it.
awesome, Andy. Unfortunately, we did not hit our 1 minute cutoff, but there was
Yeah,
some internet disturbances. But I
yeah,
think it was a good speed round nonetheless. Andy,
yeah.
thank you so much for being here. If people want to follow you to check out what you're doing, we do have your Twitter here, GeekDadGamer, right below your name. Go check out taminggaming.com. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, listener, for tuning in to Digital Doc Games. If you want to continue the conversation with myself and some more truly great people, you can find the link to the Digital Doc Games Discord in the description below. If you like the interview, please remember to drop a like or a comment or review. And remember, for all things games and health, keep it right here to Digital Doc Games by following or hitting that subscription button right there. Thank you so much, and game on.